Hello and welcome to a video created for Palo Alto University's Social Psychology course. Today I'll be discussing violent video games and its correlation to aggression and violence. The demand to control these types of games started with the ban of Death Race in 1976 and became the center of media attention after investigations into the Columbine High School shooting revealed that the attackers loved playing violent video games like Doom and Duke Nukem. Grand Theft Auto has been especially targeted because it not only involves shooting people, but also killing cops, running over people with cars, and in the latest release, torture. Now, just because some of the people who've committed violent crimes have played these types of games, it doesn't necessarily mean that playing them caused them to commit the crimes. We have to ask the proper questions, review the data, and come to an empirical conclusion rather than relying on intuition. Some opponents of violent video games claim that the added realism of modern games make players become too immersed, causing gamers to become desensitized to violence and increase aggression. Georg Zumbach, Caroline Seitz, and Matthias Blumke conducted a study in 2015 that compared the impact of playing two-dimensional versus three-dimensional games on explicit and implicit association tests on aggressiveness. 69 students from a university were given 10 minutes to play Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, with half of them wearing NVIDIA's 3D goggles. They found that men using 3D were more immersed in the game, while women were less immersed than their 2D counterparts. Surprisingly, explicit measures of aggression decreased, while implicit measures increased for both 2D and 3D users. So although increasing realism does increase immersion, it seems that the act of playing a game itself causes increased aggression rather than because of how realistic it is. The next topic we'll take a look at is hostile attribution bias. This is the tendency to think that another person's behavior is threatening and is important because it often precedes an aggressive act. In 2015, James Bonus, Alana Peebles, and Karen Riddle not only studied how violent video games affect hostile attributions, but also measured whether the level of aggressive thoughts, called aggressive cognition, in participants changed. They had 82 volunteers from a university in the Midwest play either a violent or non-violent video game. There was no significant difference in aggressive cognition between groups, and it actually increased in both. They also found out that violence or enjoyment had no direct influence on hostile attributions. While it's true that the ones who enjoyed playing violent video games had higher hostile attributions, the ones who didn't enjoy it actually had lower scores than the people who played the non-violent game. What do the results imply? Similar to the previous study, aggressive behavior that might occur after playing violent video games is less likely because of the violence and more so because of the increased frustration from trying to beat a well-made and challenging game. If that's the case, maybe people who enjoy playing violent video games are naturally more aggressive in the first place. It's a good thing that Johannes Brewer, Jens Vogelsang, Thorsten Quandt, and Ruth Vessel published the results of their study in 2015 regarding that exact question. They wondered whether playing violent video games predicts physical aggression and whether physical aggression predicts the use of violent video games. 276 German gamers were grouped as either adolescents aged 14 to 17 or young adults aged 18 to 21. Data was recorded at the start of the study and again a year later. The first thing they realized was that although the use of violent games increased with age, the level of physical aggression didn't change over time. Also, although the adolescents who are more physically aggressive played more violent games, the same relationship didn't apply to the young adults, even after taking into account gender, education, and the overall amount of time spent on games. In other words, violent games did not predict aggression, and aggression only predicted the use of violent games for adolescents. The researchers concluded that this was most likely due to normal developmental phases that include a period of increased aggressive behavior during adolescence. No matter what, the studies show that playing games does increase aggression, but how does this translate to the potential of it resulting in an aggressive act? In 2014, Whitney DeCamp studied the results of a survey completed in 2008 by 6,567 8th graders from all public and charter schools in the state of Delaware. She wanted to see if violent video game use could predict hitting someone, taking a weapon to school, or carrying a gun. The results showed less than a 1% chance that playing violent games would affect any of them. So what variables did? All three were significantly correlated with either seeing or hearing violence at home, sensation seeking, or low parental monitoring. Basically, it's the social and environmental factors that are more likely to cause people to act aggressively. All this talk about predictability and possibilities, though, doesn't mean anything if the results don't relate to the real world. In 2014, Patrick Markey, Charlotte Markey, and Juliana French used market research data and FBI crime reports in order to investigate whether violent video games are linked to violent crimes. An important aspect of this study is that autocorrelations and trends were identified and removed. This is crucial because of aspects such as when technology increases, video game sales will naturally increase as well. The researchers conducted analyses on 4 indicators of violent video game use: annual changes in video game sales, monthly changes in video game sales, keyword searches for violent video game strategy guides, and the release of 3 popular violent video games. These were compared to aggravated assault and homicide rates between 1978 and 2011. For each analysis, it was observed that violent video games were unrelated and often negatively correlated with violent crime rates. So let's review. Increased aggression after playing a video game is most likely due to the need to increase aggression in order to progress through the game. Rather than violent video games creating aggressive people, it's more likely that aggressive people tend to favor playing violent video games. Also, the increased aggression that occurs from playing games is unlikely to produce physical aggression and more likely due to environmental factors. Finally, not only does real-world data not support the notion that violent video game usage leads to an increase in violent crime rate, there's evidence that it may be helping to reduce it. Obviously, this isn't a fully comprehensive meta-analysis of all the research out there, and I didn't have time to include specific details of each study, but hopefully now you have a better understanding that's built upon empirical scientific data. The bottom line, don't rely on intuition, check the facts and come to an informed decision.